What's going on, everybody? I'm Jeff St. Pierre, and this is episode 173 of the Adult Education Podcast. We're going to do a bit of a throwback this week, so strap in as we discuss AOR music with music critic and author Paul Rees. First of all, I want to apologize for my voice. I live with a 5-year-old, so there is a never-ending stream of terrible diseases floating into my house on a daily basis, especially this time of year. So I apologize that my voice is not perfect, but I did want to get this episode out there because today is the day the book actually comes out. I'm sure there are quite a few of you that listen to this podcast, but maybe don't know my background. So I started working in radio when I was about 18 years old and just left the business a few months ago. So I spent about 26 years in radio. I worked with alternative rock, classic rock, pop, and country radio. And I have to say the classic rock years were among the most interesting. I was in Philadelphia working for the radio station WMGK. Now the DJs at the time, these are folks like John DeBella, Debbie Calton, Andre Gardner, and Ray Koob. They had the best stories from over the years. All of those folks were like the big rock DJs in the 80s and then transitioned to classic rock radio later in their careers. The radio industry was wild when what we know now as classic rock was the new and current music. I mean, it embodied the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll mentality. Now, I laugh sometimes. People always want to go backstage at a concert. They have this picture in their minds about the partying and the fun that goes on back there. I've been backstage at a lot of concerts, and I'll tell you that nearly all of them are extremely boring. There's no partying. The artists largely just hang out on their buses until showtime, and many of them now are super health conscious, so there's not even a lot of drinking going on. But that mental image of the wild nights backstage can really be traced back to that mid to late 70s into the 80s rock music world. I think there's a sort of fascination with that time period. Rock music was dominating with bands like Journey, Foreigner, Boston, and Genesis, just to name a few. And it all started with radio. Radio was the only place you could go to hear your favorite songs or to be introduced to new music. These are the AOR years. Now, AOR stands for Album-Oriented Rock. Record labels started investing a lot of money into full albums and big, huge productions. To some, AOR is a dirty word, but it was and continues to be for a lot of artists a hugely successful genre. Music critic and author Paul Rees just published his latest book called Raised on Radio, Power Ballads, Cocaine and Payola, the AOR Glory Years. It's an oral history book, so the stories are being told by those who lived it firsthand. I've been nerding out so hard with this book, and having the chance to speak with Paul was just great. I do hope that you enjoy our conversation. Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Paul. This book is fascinating and quite the undertaking. When I got it, I was like, what is this massive thing that has just been handed to me? This is remarkable that you took the time to put this book together.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be engaged with the music itself to embark on that sort of thing. But I was, so yeah, no regret.
So I know the book is called Raised on Radio, Power Ballads, Cocaine and Payola, the AOR Glory Years. I guess let's first start with your background. I know this is not your first book. You've written many books, but what is your background in music? Why is this something that you're so passionate about?
Well, probably. I don't like to put the years on it. It makes me feel even older than I do already. But yeah, so I guess I've been writing about music for 30 odd years. I was editor of Kerrang magazine here in the UK, then Q magazine, and then since 2012 I've been writing books pretty much. So I think this is my 10th book that I've done. And I guess in terms of this music, I think it comes with a lot of people. It's music I grew up on. It's the first kind of American music I properly discovered for myself. And those songs have just endured. They've never gone away.
It's not like American music wasn't popular, but up until that mid-70s region, I feel like the UK in particular had their whole, I mean, they still do, but they had their whole own brand of music, right? I mean, you had that so much of that coming over to America. But like you said, like in the 70s, it was like American music started to make the trip the other way.
Yeah, I mean, it did. I guess if you're talking about, the Eagles, Dylan, Springsteen, Mellencamp, all those people that came over here, I think I put it in the start of the book. If you were into Journey and Foreigner, though, they were almost not referenced at all. You couldn't find them anywhere. There was one radio show that was on at nearly midnight on a Friday night that would occasionally play one of those bands. And then Kerrang magazine started in 1981, and that was the first time I even knew what Journey looked like. And it was very different. It's not that dissimilar now. I mean, it's still that whole era of music is kind of ignored en masse. in the UK, which is and which is odd considering how many people know the songs and listen to the songs.
It's funny how that era of music is still so widely popular in America now. I mean, it's like these artists you mentioned in the book, like these artists are still touring. They're still selling music. Some of them are even streaming more than current artists right now. So it's amazing that songs that are 40, some even 50 years old now are just as popular with people as more current and big names that we see now.
Yeah, I think one of the essences of that and what the book touches upon is the craftsmanship of that. They're great pop songs. Mm-hmm. They actually understood what it was, a pop song. Verse, don't bore us, get to the chorus. There was an economy in it, and they were brilliantly produced, really well arranged. So they don't sound dated. The best of those songs just are evergreen. They don't sound dated. I think in some ways also they cast you back to more kind of an aspirational America, the idea of driving down the freeway with the top down and all the rest of it. And I think probably at the moment people could do with a bit of distraction and a bit of good nature.
Yeah, aspirational America is definitely the right term for that. Aspirational, yes. But you know what? You mentioned, I think it was Steve Overland in the book, because this book is an oral history. So you've got the people that were living it. They're the ones that are telling the story. You're just piecing it together. But I don't want to say but Steve Overland says, he talks about the song Keep On Loving You, and he says that could be a hit today. And I've said that about a lot of songs from that era. I used to work at a classic rock station about 15 years ago. And I used to think Steppenwolf's Magic Carpet Ride, if that song came out today, that would be an alt-rock hit instantaneously. Like, that song has all the pieces that current music are using, and I think a lot of those songs would fit right in if they were retouched a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you listen to the Mutt Lange productions, for just one thing, if you listen to Foreign 4, Pyromania, Def Leppard, The Cars, Heartbeat City, those records sound, I mean, Taylor Swift's records don't sound dissimilar to the way those records sound. I think Mutt Lange was hugely influenced, and that's one of the points I think a lot of the people in the book make. They were good at what they did. They were really good musicians. They understood how to use a studio. They understood how to make records, and that's the thing that's carrying. If you're a craftsman, you don't lose it, do you? It doesn't date.
So, okay, let's go back to the beginning just a little bit here and talk about AOR, because I think that's a term that a lot of folks in radio or in music will understand, but maybe the average listener doesn't know what AOR stands for. So can you tell me a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, it was kind of a format that was invented around about late 60s, early 70s, because records was very much top 40 orientated in America at that point. And there's various people that claim credit for it, but they were researching a new kind of format. When the 60s happened, late 60s, you get people like Hendrix, Dylan, and things like that. They suddenly realised people would listen to any track off an album, not the top 40 track. So it gave them license to play lots of tracks. So the format that developed from that, about a deeper dive into music, a richer experience, they called it album-oriented rock. So it was based around the album rather than the single. That kind of got narrowed down with the advent of the Boston record and the first Foreigner record into that particular kind of music that was very much, I think it became not so much about albums per se as very polished, very streamlined, very accessible, very commercial records.
And there is a very distinct difference between, because I think in recent years you've seen the term yacht rock pop up a lot, and there is a difference between AOR and yacht rock if you look back in history. I mean, maybe some of those guys maybe would have carried over a little bit at the time, but looking back on it, there is a distinct difference between those two formats.
Yeah, my agent over in the UK is a yacht rock aficionado, and so you could get he could get into a long argument with you about the difference between the two things. I think people like Boss Skaggs, and people like that who sit within that yacht rock camp, and which David Paich from Toto worked on Silk Degrees, was a collaborator on that. I tend to think yacht rock's a little bit smoother, a little bit more, for want of a better term, a bit more sophisticated. AOR rock, and I think that's about as dumbing down as you can get as an explanation for what the difference as I see it is.
And I don't think all AOR falls in the same category in a way too. And let me explain what I mean by that. When I worked for a classic rock station, it was 2005 to 2007. And there were a lot of discussions at that time of, was Bon Jovi classic rock? Should we be playing Bon Jovi on this radio station? But they were playing Foreigner, and they were playing Styx, and they were playing Bon Jovi's contemporaries, So there was an interesting vibe of, well, this, even if the songs came out at the same time, does this song sound classic rock or does it not? And I think some AOR has that sort of what we know as now classic rock, but some other AOR doesn't. You know, Bon Jovi, I think, threaded the needle between AOR and hair metal. You know, he was kind of on that line in between. So it is interesting to look at some of that now and go, okay, so where does all of this fit?
Yeah, you can drive yourself mad by that. I mean, I think it was kind of the thing, you know, in doing the book, because Bon Jovi are in there and Def Leppard with Pyromania and Hysteria in there, and you couldn't necessarily call them the Def Leppard album strictly AOR, but Photograph is an AOR song, Love Bites is a power ballad, and I think that kind of point 87 is when it mutated into something else. And whether it be, like you said, hair metal or pop metal or whatever you want to call it, but those records were right on the cusp of that, and I think they're important records because of it.
I know a lot of the guys and people, I should say, in the book are they have conflicted feelings about how some of the music had to transition for them. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them enjoyed cashing the checks, but they didn't all love turning into power ballad bands. But I'll tell you, power ballads are what brought me into that format. When it was back in the 90s, they had all those compilation CDs. I don't know if you had this in the UK, but you would see these TV commercials for Monsters of Rock or whatever it was. And they had one called Monster Ballads that I definitely purchased, and I would have worn out the vinyl if I had it on vinyl. It was on CD, but I would have worn it out. I listened to it all the time.
That's the thing with the power. It's just route one, isn't it? I mean, it's a formula, but it's an irresistible one, and you know that probably will never die. People are going to be writing power ballads until the end of time.
I think one of the coolest things about this book, and it is it's an undertaking, so I have not finished the whole thing yet, so I apologize for that. But one of the coolest things for me was being taken into that world in a special way, because it is a world that will likely never be replicated. And not just from the success of the artists, but the things that were going on behind the scenes. I mean, even in the title of the book, you talk about cocaine, payola, and all of that. I mean, there was so much stuff, money just being thrown around and just madness in this world that most people had no idea was even going on.
Yeah, I think that as much as the music, that was the point of interest for it. Because I think all books, non-fiction or fiction, they start with a story. And the story here, right from off the bat, seemed much, much bigger than just a group of bands making music. And you're exactly right. It's that moment in time that's vanished. You know, the fact that people were, you know, program directors at radio stations were getting SUVs sent to them for playing a record. And I think Steve LaCarth from Toto said, you know, you'd go into any recording studio. I think it's Giorgio Moroder's studio. You know, there were buckets of cocaine lined up in the studio. But also, I think it's something about the way people made records. Then, you know, it was a group of people who went into a studio with tape, who put it down in a room, and a lot of those songs came together in the room on the spur of the moment, and that seems to be a dying, if not dead, art. Records aren't made like that anymore.
I had a program director at a radio station who was telling me about his years in the 80s, and he said he wouldn't even listen to a record if it didn't come with a $100 bill or a bag of cocaine. He's like, if you're not going to give me that, I'm not even opening your record. Forget it. I guess these guys are much more willing to tell the stories 20 years after it was happening. Yeah. What was cool about my experience working for the classic rock station, it was in Philadelphia, and all of the DJs that were on the radio, the main DJs, were the main rock DJs from the 80s. They had transitioned from the main rock station to the classic rock station. And the stories these people would have, I mean, just unbelievable story. I mean, one guy was telling me about this artist that would show up outside their building every night, knocking on the door when he was doing like the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, just begging to please play my record, please play my record. And it was John Bon Jovi, you know, like, and it's just fascinating to think of this time period where these people were hustling just to get anyone to listen to their music, because we know them as these massive stars. But to hear these stories over the years was just fascinating.
Yeah, I think it was Dennis DeYoung in the book. Dennis DeYoung was talking about Styx and how they had the local radio station in Chicago, and he said, you know, to get up, you'd send in your music for them to consider. And he said to be invited up onto the top floor where the program director was. He said it was like presidents and mayors were let up to that level. There was something exclusive about it. But I think it's also that thing about the power of radio in that era, that radio was so hugely important to people. It was the discovery mechanism for people, and it was something communal as well. Everybody listened to their local rock station if you're a rock fan, and that's where you found out so much music. There's a great bit. The bit I didn't know this that they were saying at the studios at the time. would have FM transmitters. So you could go out in the car park when you were making a record, and you could plug your mixing desk into the transmitter and play the track you just recorded through an FM band on your car. So you'd be able to hear exactly how it would sound on FM radio. Because they made records to fit radio, to sound great on radio.
That was the point, right? I mean, that was the only delivery system for so much of it, was to get it on the radio. And radio still plays a part now, but it's not the only delivery system. But there's still program directors that think they are sitting on the top floor of the building. It's really not. Like, I love the program directors I would run into that would get mad if an artist wouldn't talk to them. Like when Beyonce did, I worked in country radio for about 18 years. And when Beyonce kind of, did her sort of country project, the program directors were very mad at Beyonce because she didn't take the time to come talk to them. And I was like, do you think Beyonce gives a shit about you? She doesn't need you, man. Like, I don't know what you're...
Yeah, it's a very different world now, isn't it?
Very different world, very different world. It's also weird to me to read the book and think about because it kind of wraps up around 1986, and to think about how that's 40 years ago right now. How is 1986 40 years ago for us?
Yeah, that's a pulls you up, that thought.
Now, this book being an oral history, there are people that are in the book that are no longer with us, that are no longer living. I'm curious, like how, I'm sure there were old interviews that you used, maybe from your own interviews, but how did you put this all together? How did you get some of these conversations?
A mix of things. I think it started off with, an idealized cast list, the people who had to be in it and I wanted in it. The ones I could contact, I messaged all of them. Ideally, if I could get to them directly, but they all got messaged. I think over 50 people I spoke to for the book. And then the ones that either were no longer with us or declined or I just simply couldn't reach, then it's all about the research and trying to find as many different, interviews or sources that you could from all across the thing. So I think I ended up with something in the region of 500,000 words of interviews, transcript, and that was edited down to, I think it's just over, it's about 120,000 words, I think, the book.
When I saw the cast of characters at the beginning of the book, it tells you all the names. I was like, holy crap. That's a lot of people that you would have had to find interviews from or to speak with. I mean, it was, my hat is off to you. Quite an undertaking.
But it's a good, you know what it's like when you get to speak to people who make music. If you're a music fan, hearing people who make music talk about the act of making music is eternally fascinating. I think one of the best interviews I did was Billy Squire for the book. I really loved Billy Squire back in the day, and I haven't really thought a lot about Billy Squire because he's kind of vanished out of our world, and he was very, very reticent initially to talk to me. We had a few emails backwards and forwards, and he agreed to do it on the. He said, "I'll talk to you, but I'll only talk about my experience of my favourite radio station in Boston. I don't want to talk at all about my music or anything else." And obviously, when you get him, as we were on a Zoom call, when you get him going, you couldn't stop him from talking. But it's been really nice because he not long after the interview, he sent me an MP3 of a new track he'd been working on because I've started writing again. And I heard from him a couple of weeks ago, said, I'm making a record and I'll send you when it's done. So there's that lovely sort of reintroduction to someone that I'd been a fan of when I was a teenager, and being able to talk to that and hear how he made those records and what was in his head when he was doing it is part of the reason you do it.
I find talking to artists, many years after they were the big thing, right? Like I find they're a little bit more open to sharing the stories. Like artists that are in it, that are in the middle of it, they're much more guarded and they're protective about how they put their image out there. But it's like afterwards, they're like, whatever, let's tell the story. I mean, there's some really candid conversations in this book that I was laughing. With Phil Collins at one point talks about writing with Genesis, and I forget the exact quote, but he says something about, he's like, I just wanted to write good songs. Peter Gabriel was getting all the attention, but I was cashing all the checks. And I think he says, like, I've never said that to anybody before. And so I love the candidness that you can get from people this many years after the events were taking place.
Yeah, and you're also blessed. I mean, someone like Steve Lukather, I don't think Steve Lukather knows the meaning of the word boundary. So he's about as open as you can possibly get. Joe Elliott from Def Leppard's another one who could sit in the whole court for hours and is just as honest as you can possibly be and as enlightening as you can possibly be. So, it's part of the joy of doing something like this, hearing stories that you do, being taken into a recording session with Mutt Lange is is fantastic.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
gosh, I can't even imagine. I was reading it feeling jealous of you, because I'm like, you're the one asking the questions, you're the one getting these stories, and I'm reading them through you, putting it together. And I just could not believe like the things that were, I'm like, this must have been so fascinating to just be in that room and hear them telling that story to you, or on Zoom, wherever it was, however you were interviewing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Thomas Dolby. Thomas Dolby had played keyboards on Foreigner 4 and on Def Leppard records. I think he was telling me a story about Mutt Lange and saying, he was absolutely obsessed with balance in the sound, balance in life, to perfect symmetry. And Thomas Dolby said anecdotally he'd heard when he was making a record, he was renting a house in the English countryside, and he'd got a trout pond outside. And you could see the trout pond from the studio, through the window of the studio. And he said he was sitting looking at the trout pond, and he realised it wasn't quite symmetrical. It was different, slightly different one side. So he literally did call in the builders to have it redug and perfectly. So that everything stopped, work on the record stopped, until he got the trout pond perfectly symmetrical, because he couldn't concentrate when he was looking at that. And that's just, you don't get characters like that anymore, do you? In terms of just fascinating, mercurial people.
Yeah, it's different, but I also still feel like there's so much of this going on. Okay, so this is interesting. So Mick Jones in the book says that towards the end of the AOR Glory Years, fans started to move toward country music, which I thought was really interesting, because I would think that fans of this rock would probably transition more towards the glam sort of hair metal thing. Because I think about late 80s, mid to late 80s country music, and to me, it doesn't sound anything like AOR, but I guess for some of those fans. But I feel like that's happened more currently too. Like the fans of the 2000s rock, like Nickelback, Creed, they transitioned to country music. And even now, Nickelback will take country artists on tour with them, and Creed is doing a big country festival this summer or whatever. So it's interesting how there is sort of a tie-in to this rock world with the country. I don't know. It was the transition there, I thought, was an interesting insight from Mick Jones.
Yeah, I think possibly the two things. I mean, I think the songwriting, the way the songs are written, the attention to musicians and things like that, and also that sense of authenticity. I think whether you like hair metal or not, you could argue about that. I think country music is a musical form, a purely musical form. So I think there's a bit more confidence in that. The influence of Mutt Lange, you listen to the Shania Twain records, they could be Def Leppard albums with, made in Nashville. And Bon Jovi's made country records. There's a guy in the book, Dan Hoff, who was in that band Giant, who were right at the end of the AOR era, were expected to be massive and didn't. But he's gone on and made an enormous career for himself as a producer and songwriter in Nashville. So I think there seems to be, I think it's probably down to musicianship and a sense of authenticity that kind of links the two together.
I always loved that term, authenticity, having spent 18 years in the country music world, because there are artists that are certainly very talented that write their own music, but like Nashville is a machine. There's very little authentic music going on. I mean, you never meet the songwriters of the, I think it was Jason Aldean recently said his new album is his most personal to date. I think he wrote one song on the album. Like, how is it personal? You didn't write any of these songs.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I'm thinking more of people like Jason Isbell, Chris Stapleton, and people like the people who. I mean, there's always it's the different extremes, isn't there? Because there were AOR bands who were very much formulaic and done to a formula. Just as there is in the country, you can almost do an algorithm of how to write an AOR song and how to write a country song. So yeah, take the point. But
even some of those bands too, which I thought was interesting, some of the AOR bands didn't start that way, but as things got bigger and bigger, they were sort of forced into that way. I think it was Starship was talking about the song "Nothing's Gonna Stop Us," and they had this song and they felt beholden to it now because it was so successful that they felt like they had to do more, and other artists felt like they had to have that male-female duet because this one song was so successful. So they kind of had to change who they were, and they didn't like that. But it was like, but what do we do? Do we say no to this money coming in, or do we what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, and the difference was enormous, though, because they were selling records in ridiculous amounts. I mean, it was the point that pretty much tore Foreigner apart, wasn't it? Mick Jones, I Want to Know What Love Is, became the song that defined them. And Lou Gramm not hated him, but he didn't want them to do ballad. He didn't want them to be a ballad band. Didn't want that perception of them. So, and they never got away from it after that. So that you can get, I think, REO Speedwagon as well. Kevin Cronin was the guy who could write the ballads, so he took over from Gary Richrath as sort of the main songwriter in the band. So it affects everything. I mean, it affected the internal politics of bands, affected how artists sounded. It affected, if you think, people like Yes and Genesis, who, you become aware of what works on American radio. And America it is hugely important. So you start making records that will fit American radio.
Critical acclaim and success do not always work together. And I liked how in the book it was talked about how, AOR wasn't always viewed as the most cool thing out there, but they were selling 10 million albums or whatever it was. But when I think about the other, like the critical acclaim, like New Wave or whatever, a lot of that was one-hit wonders when you look back on it, right? I mean, you had these artists that would come out and have one big hit, but then you'd have these AOR artists like Foreigner or whatever that have multiple greatest hits albums that they can fill, or Journey. I mean, for crying out loud, how many amazing and huge songs did they have? So it is, I always find the difference between critical acclaim and success to be a very interesting subject as well. And this book, I mean, is kind of a sign of it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an astonishing. If you go back and look at it, Rolling Stone, I guess, on this side of the Atlantic is kind of seen as the bastion of American music writing or pop culture. Journey have never ever been on the cover of never been on the cover of Rolling Stone. Foreigner never been on the cover of Rolling Stone. Now, whether you like either of those bands, to think that that it implicitly suggests that they've not been important in the fabric of music it's astonishing. And you could go and look at any number of Rolling Stone covers that are very much of the moment, in the moment, and that's gone. Journey have been with us for 50 years, and I've just never. I don't think they were. I think they were seen as it became that phrase corporate rock, didn't it? As if it was music produced by committee. I thought that was one of the interesting things in talking to. I was talking to Steve Smith from Journey, and his recollection of how a lot of the songs took place was walking into a room and somebody just be playing something, and Steve Perry or John Cale or Neil Schon would pick up on it. Then they'd all join in, and it would happen organically in the moment. They didn't have committee meetings talking about which song was going to be the ballad, which song wasn't. And famously, you look at "Don't Stop Believing." That is not a conventional song in any shape or form. There is literally no chorus in that song, and it doesn't fit any blueprint. It's just a great song. I think possibly Steve Perry and Neil Schon would have taken the commercial success over the critical acclaim, but I think they would have probably liked both at the same time.
I think everybody loves some critical acclaim, right? But it doesn't hurt when you are cashing, not to use the phrase again, but when you're cashing the checks, it doesn't hurt, right? Like, it's okay. I was thinking a little bit in that mode and the idea of like song by committee. And I'm sure that happened for some. Whenever you involve a major record label, especially in this time period where music was so financially big, I mean, these labels were making so much money. It was interesting, some of the stories that came up of artists that wanted to do a solo project or wanted to try something new. And then you'd hear about the label just like killing it or just completely destroying any of the publicity or press they could possibly have because they were so concerned about what it would do to their more profitable product or projects,
Yeah, the record industry has never not been Machiavellian, has it? But I think, it's probably understanding that. It's that these bands were so huge at the time. And like you said, there was so much money swirling around the music business. So I think the obvious case in the book is Lou Gramm, who put out a solo record that started to do very well. And in Lou Gramm's telling, Mick Jones shuffled into the executives at Atlantic and said, if you keep putting money into this, there won't be another Foreigner record because he will go off on his own. At which point, according to Lou, absolutely all publicity and marketing support stopped on his record. But then they were, these were the golden gooses. They were the commercial behemoths of the time. So they looked after their investment carefully and ruthlessly. That
was the story I was thinking of. Actually, I was like, wow, that is ruthless. I mean, you got guys that are in the same band and one of them is killing his, wow, that's a gutsy move.
Yeah, that's hardcore.
Talking about Payola a little bit too, I think that's a phrase that if people are not involved in radio or have not spent a lot of time with radio, they might not understand Payola. I used to have to take annual Payola quizzes or whatever because it's illegal now. But Payola essentially was paying someone to play a record, and you can't technically do that now. I mean, it still happens, but not in the way that it did 30 or 40 years ago. But wow, I mean, there was some point in the book where they were saying, program directors that were making $300 a week were driving around in like Ferraris or something. I was like, the money that was just getting thrown around to these people was insane.
Yeah, I mean, it was a business, a sort of organized crime.
Yeah, no, for real.
And there were senatorial hearings into it, FBI probes into it. Very few people actually convicted of it. Certainly were involved in it. That's a familiar story, isn't it, at the moment? But yeah, I mean, I think it's another part of the context that's really interesting. But in any business where there's lots of money to be made, there are going to be shady corners and dark goings on, aren't there?
There was something too where they were saying that some radio programmers would say, yes, I'm going to add your record, I'm going to play your record on the air, but then they wouldn't. And I think about that in context today. You can't do that now because everything is digitally encoded. So they know when you're playing it and when you're not playing it. A label would expect my radio station to play a song, say 12 times a week. And if it got played 11 times, I'd get a phone call. Hey, where's that 12th time? I'm like, how do you even know? But in the 80s, they didn't have the same, it was handwritten reporting. So, I mean, you could kind of lie about it and just tell people you were playing it and just take the money.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to quite a lot of people who worked in radio, DJs, record company people. And yeah, the stories, I mean, just some remarkable stories. There's people disappearing on holiday. There'd be a song added to a playlist that everybody went, I thought we didn't like this song. And the program director was off to Hawaii for a week, which would kind of explain why that was on the...
We like it now.
And yet, there was some of the things that I was told that were so Byzantine by the way they'd get records into the charts and onto stations that you couldn't actually transcribe into the book because it was so complicated. It would have taken up pages and pages and pages. But I mean, pretty much every dark art going was used.
It's funny to look at it and think of it as like a dark thing to do, right? And illegal now to do. But there's also the fascination with it, right? There's also like, wow, I can't, like, I kind of wish that I had experienced it. I kind of wish I had gotten into radio earlier in my life so I could say that was a part, So it's so interesting, the two sides to the story where it's like, well, yeah, it's not really good, but wow, what an amazing tale.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess the guys involved in the record companies at that time as well, the people who were running them were, it's touched upon in the book that it was music guys running the record company up to the point kind of towards the end of the telling of this book when it became lawyers, and everything changed at that point. The music business became a different business. But the guys, when it was people who knew, who were beloved of music, they were still characters and still forceful. But there was something about it that gave you such a wealth of music and things that there was a bit more sense of trailblazing and risk taking in those days.
There's not as many of them around now as there used to be, but I used to love when I'd run into a promoter that was promoting records in the 80s because it would just be, the stories. I mean, I would just sit down with them and just hear the stories. There was one woman, her name was Bobby Silver, and I guess the woman, the character Fran Drescher played in Spinal Tap was based off of Bobby Silver in real life. And God, Bobby Silver would just sit there and I'd just sit there for hours listening to her tell stories of all the things that she experienced. I mean, these people, they were in the trenches in the music world, and they had the receipts to take with them.
Yeah, I interviewed a guy called Les Garland for the book. And Les's background was radio. He was a DJ and a program director. He's the guy who does the DJ voice over on Starships We Built This City.
Okay.
And then he was one of the executives at the launch of MTV and was sort of heavily involved. And Garland is a character in capital letters. I think it was John Parr. That's what John Parr had said. Garland was crazier than anybody who played in a band. And yeah, he's got some amazing stories, just some brilliant stories.
My last question for you, I'm just curious, how long did it take you to put this project together?
About 14 months altogether.
Really? That's actually less than I would have thought. I mean, just knowing how much there is involved, I was thinking 5 years or something.
No, it's about 15 months. I mean, it's probably quite an intense 15 months as well.
Yeah.
So it'll be a while now. I'm sort of on a drip feed, weaning myself off listening to AOR 24 hours. So,
Probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Paul, I love this book. I'm so glad that you put this together, and I hope that other people find as much enjoyment in it as well. Raised on Radio, Power Ballads, Cocaine, and Payola, the AOR Glory Years. Where do people go if they want to find out more about you, your writing? I know you have a Substack, I think, out there as well. Where do people go to find more about you, Paul?
Yeah, there's my Substack out there, just my name, and also a website, which is Paul-Rees-author.com. So you can log on to the website, and there's a library of articles and all the books on there as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Paul. I appreciate it. And I don't know what you're working on next. I know you deserve a break. I don't know what you're working on next, though, but I can't wait to read it. I'm going to dive into the back catalog. I saw you have a book about Elliott Smith that I really want to check out because I was such a fan of his work as well. So thank you again for your time, Paul, and keep up the good work.
Thanks for having me, Jed.
Thank you so much to Paul Rees for his time. The book, Raised on Radio, Power Ballads, Cocaine, and Payola, the AOR Glory Years, officially came out today, February 24th. It is such a great blast from the past and perfect for any music nerd in your life. And thank you to all of you for listening. I appreciate you sharing some time with me on the Adult Education Podcast. Until next week, be well.